Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I move this Welsh Conservatives motion in the name of my colleague Darren Miller. I welcome this opportunity to open this incredibly important debate today at a critical time for education in Wales. I do find it concerning that the Welsh Conservatives had to use their time allocation to talk about education, as it's the only opportunity we've had to highlight concerns to the Minister of Education, who, apart from questions earlier, has been hiding behind written statements so far this year. With the restrictions remaining in place in our schools in Wales, unlike in England, it is arguably of paramount importance that as a Senate, we have the opportunity to scrutinise current restrictions and concerns in arguably one, if not the most important responsibilities of this government. The motion aims to highlight the adverse effects that COVID-19 and the restrictions have had on children and young people across Wales, and notes a persistent per pupil funding shortfall between Wales and other parts of the UK. Crucially, this motion calls on the Welsh Government to take action to overcome the impact of the pandemic on Welsh learners, to ensure that every young person can reach their full potential and have the very best start in life. Although unfortunately not in the motion laid before you, one of the most significant adverse effects of this pandemic has been on the preparedness for the most seismic change in education for a generation, the new curriculum for Wales, which launches within months. Following conversations I've had with many school leaders and teachers, they are very concerned with the lack of support that they've had now during these final stages of preparation, particularly due to all the extra pressures put upon them at the moment. And also the lack of any explanation from this Welsh Government on what exams will look like in the future, so to enable them to properly prepare for their lessons accordingly. Although more flexibility is greatly welcomed, it is a completely new way of working that is a far cry from how teaching has been for many decades. There really no doubt now does need to be more clarity during these final stages of preparations, so teaching staff can themselves feel prepared and to ensure that pupils are armed with the skills and knowledge they will need for those exams. With no clarity over the future of qualifications, secondary schools in particular, and with good reason, cannot immerse themselves fully into the curriculum design and development process, already a struggle for many during pandemic pressures. There absolutely has to be an end goal, and we need to be seeing that clear goal as soon as possible. Teachers are craving this direction, and there needs to be a coherent national professional learning offer available to school staff in Wales. Also, there is currently no clear understanding on how far subsidiarity, the bedrock of this new curriculum, can be stretched at school level. Fundamental things that need to be addressed so plans can be put in place as soon as possible, particularly due to the fact that planning time has been missed from no fault of this government or teaching staff. I'm going off the point of how COVID has affected children and young people of Wales, you may think, but no, the fact that the preparing of the new curriculum for Wales has taken a back seat is very concerning and a worrying impact that this pandemic has had over the last 2 years. Everyone wants the new curriculum to succeed, but the Minister must realise, as well as throwing in extra money, that more direction is now needed. With all the pressures of this pandemic, staff absences, pupil absences, a rise in homeschooling and missed education, we now need this government to throw everything it has at education to ensure that our children get the very best start in life, an education that gives them opportunities on a par at least with the rest of the UK, if not hopefully better. Unfortunately, we're not starting with much of an advantage. Learners in Wales have missed more days of their education last year than anywhere else in the UK, 66 days, over a third of the school year. This cannot but have a significant detrimental impact on our learners. This is evident from recent conclusions of the Estyn report, which identified that learners' skills in Wales have suffered in maths, reading, Welsh language and social skills, all a result of school closures. This is very worrying. Unfortunately, Wales has been lagging far behind the rest of the UK in educational terms for decades now. And although the Education Minister previously expressed some happiness that Wales had met the average OECD level for reading and oracy, for me, this is far from okay. Former Soviet bloc countries are on that same level. We should be way above that, at a minimum on a par with Scotland and England. There really is no excuse not to be. The Welsh Government's persistent pupil shortfall between Wales and other parts of the UK is also just not good enough, but not surprising from a party that made us the only country within the UK to have ever cut an education budget. Until the recent budget, for every £1 spent in England, Wales receives £1.20. As a result, education spending per pupil in Wales should be at least £1,000 more compared to England. Children have suffered a lot during this pandemic, their education, mental health, and important milestone changes. My own 2-year-old is missed out on meeting new children of his age nearby due to baby classes being cancelled. My other son wasn't able to celebrate his last year in primary school. Lots of milestones and nativity plays and important occasions were missed out on. Trivial, you may think, but all have had an impact on the children, parents from not going ahead. Lack of electronic devices, bad broadband, also major problems and barriers to learning that the pandemic have highlighted, amongst other many inequalities across this country. The pandemic has also thrown up and highlighted major problems of safety of children and the quality of an education that children can receive at home. And also the pandemic has made us all realise just how important school and school life is, not in just terms of education, but for the mental health of our children. Many homeschool children do well, and it works for some families, including a colleague of mine, but there is now a worrying rise in home education. And I say worrying as recently as often been done by parents as a reaction to having to wear masks in schools or worries about the virus, not as a choice about what is best for their children, their education, their family and future prospects. And due to this trend, I'd be very interested to hear stats from the Minister as to how this government measure how qualified these parents wanting to do homeschooling now are, how regular inspections are, how progress is monitored, and whether there will be anything done to encourage re-enrolling into schools. As recent data shows, 4,000 5 to 15-year-olds in 2021 were homeschooled, up 60% from 2018-19. This is clearly a steep rise, so I look forward to hearing how the Minister is going to address this urgently. I welcome this year's increase in the education budget, but still wonder if it will be enough really to claw back the time missed and to deal with all the numerous massive changes we are seeing in education at the moment, namely the new curriculum, the tertiary education bill, ventilation adaptations, mental health, and I could go on. We welcome the money for ventilation adaptation, but some degree of urgency needs to be attached to it, as we're still seeing children sitting in coats and jackets in freezing temperatures with all the windows and doors open in our schools and colleges. This is simply not right for the well-being and not sustainable. Another major concern and impact of the pandemic has been the increase in waiting times for children to be seen by an NDT specialist. There is currently a 2-year plus waiting list for children to see an NDT specialist, which is storing up significant issues for the future and, in my opinion, putting children's learning and life chances at significant risk. Without the NDT appointments, we have children who are being clinically identified as autistic or having ADHD, resulting in poorer levels of understanding and provision, thus creating a scenario where children are simply not being adequately supported to thrive, which I know teachers are finding extremely frustrating. Personally, I don't think this is good enough in this day and age. We need to get these fundamental things right before we look to headline-grabbing schemes. I welcome recent monies being put towards this and the changes to the system to identify, but we cannot let any more children slip through the net. This couldn't be more urgent. Particularly, as was said in the education questions earlier, as for vulnerable children, their vulnerabilities have only been exacerbated by this pandemic. So it is vital that we get support in place and that this is sped up for children. One of the main concerns we all share, and as is apparent from the amendments, is children and young people's mental health, and staff too. Whilst schools are able to use the Recruit, Recover, Raise Standards money to support children through targeted wellbeing issues, the more wider concern is where schools go from there. As without the clinical support for children with significant mental health issues, we're simply putting sticking plasters over a gaping wound. There needs to be a root and branch review of child and adolescents' mental health services in Wales, as this is not a now problem, but one which will have consequences for generations. I find it concerning that recently the focus of this government has been all wrong. New sexuality education that raises women, a left-wing rehashing of our history that's about to be introduced to our children, and a new curriculum teachers still have no clear guidance of how to implement. Another concerning impact for our children is, in terms of current restrictions here in Wales, is face masks in classrooms. UK government evidence and even Welsh scientific advisors have said that they make minimal difference in classrooms. But because this government are too scared to stand up to the unions and heed scientific advice, our children are still having to wear masks in classrooms all day. This can have a detrimental impact on learning and their learners, with it restricting communication between teachers and pupils and pupil-to-pupil communication. It is also deeply uncomfortable and restrictive to wear them hours on end. Surely there needs to be a balance and harms approach here, with a decision coming from the top as it will be put to our schools, LAs, in difficult positions otherwise, giving them, and given the strength of feeling on masks from either camp. I think that this decision should be made nationally. Having made many different approaches will do pupils no favours and create disparities across the nation, upset as well as confusion. I would say to the Minister that some things require local solutions, but issues such as face masks require a demand, actually, a national approach. Of course, there will be local school-by-school solutions to many things that I said, but the feedback that I'm getting is this government needs to have more leadership, more detail in what is being asked of schools and children, and a greater effort to speed up the help for significant concerns over children's mental health, and to address the waiting times for ALN, those waiting right now to be identified ASAP, so they get the specialist help that they need. And this needs to be urgently addressed. We're now at the stage where we need more than just commitments. We need detailed plans for reform and support. Schools need to know the perimeters in which they are working, and education provision needs to be equal. Action is needed now more than ever to avert further disruption to our learners' education, and to avert a mental health crisis in our schools, with the impact of increased social media as well as many other factors during lockdown starting to now show. The mental health impact on our children and young people is one that will last for decades, and I urge members across this chamber to support our motion today, and thank all of you in advance for contributing to this important debate. It's important that we have the opportunity to debate these crucial educational concerns that we all have. Thank you.